We don't choose our desires. We
Uh-huh.
choose how we respond to them, but we don't choose our desires. We really just have to listen to it.
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
There's a difference between a functional marriage and an intimate marriage. Some marriage advice people may have received is to compromise to keep the peace between a couple. This advice is great to keep the marriage functioning, but if you keep compromising on everything in your marriage, then it really interferes with your ability to create an intimate marriage. Another aspect that makes a marriage an intimate marriage requires each person to keep developing their sense of self and who they are. Without a self, you can't actually be selfless and loving. You can't share who you are if you don't develop yourself. And these are the topics I talk about today. My guest is Alexandra Stockwell. She's got a fascinating story. She and her husband are both physicians, and they met in medical school, and they have 4 children. Sometime along her journey as a doctor, she realized how much people needed help with their intimate relationships in order to find true healing. So she kind of went on a crusade and became an intimacy coach for women and couples to help couples really heal from whatever is going on in their life. I found this conversation fascinating. She's got a lot of really good things to share, and I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. Alexandra, welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here today, too. Okay, I found this quote on your website, which I absolutely love. I want to talk about this for a second. You said, competent couples who love one another often find it very uncomfortable to admit to themselves and to another that their sex life is unfulfilling or in need of an upgrade. And I think that's right. A lot of competent couples have a really hard time admitting that their sex life needs a lot of work. How'd you come up with that? How'd you come across that in your own life?
Ooh, well, I'm going to talk more generally, but everything I'm about to say applied to me personally as well. Now, when we are teenagers or in our early 20s, depending on the context, we expect to be in a time of growth and exploration, and we don't expect to have all the answers. It might be uncomfortable in math class to raise our hand and not have the right answer, but by and large, that's a little bit part of that phase of life. When we are
Right.
at the point where we've been married for 5, 10, 40 years, built a life with another person, and everything is stable. Things look good on the outside. We're taking care of our families. We're working. And especially the more high achieving, ambitious, and competent we are professionally, we are used to either being on top of our game or knowing how to navigate it and problem solve. And so if I think of an executive or a doctor or a lawyer or an entrepreneur with their own business, whether it's a man or a woman, you are used to encountering challenges. Of course, there are problems and things that need to be adjusted, but you have your skill set intact for fixing it.
Yes, exactly.
When
You're
it
good at
comes
you're good at success, or you're good at going after what you want.
Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't be in that position. But when
Right.
it comes to relationship, particularly the intimate relationship and sexuality, by and large, people don't know how to problem solve. So, separate from everything else and just the whole topic of sex, it's so uncomfortable for a competent person to know there's a problem and not really feel resourced on how to address it. So it exacerbates any awkwardness and discomfort. That's one thing,
Mm-hmm.
which really can't be overstated how unnerving it is to not have the tools and the ways of thinking to figure out how you're going to fix the problem. Secondly, just having a conversation about it can sometimes be so confronting that it doesn't actually happen. And it means that in addition to your own situation, you have to manage what comes up between you and the other person. And
Gotcha.
then and then there's the fact that um we don't want to have anybody know that this is an area we're struggling in because we're supposed to have this figured out if we're happily married.
Right, right. It's like everything's good on the outside, so it's hard to admit things aren't that great on the inside.
Yeah, if our lives are otherwise chaotic or we're lurching from one unfulfilling job to the next, then this is nowhere near as confronting as
Uh-huh.
when we have our lives together and then there's this outlier situation in our sex life.
Right, right. Uh, and I know you are an MD, or were an MD, worked in the
I
medical
am an
profession.
MD. That's one
MD
of those
is,
things that
uh-huh.
I even if I never touch a stethoscope, I will be an MD. It's a state of being, let's say, so I
Yeah,
am
yeah,
an
yeah.
MD forevermore.
As an MD, what happened in your personal life that made you realize you really want to go, like, examine your own intimate relationship with your husband and then see this pattern in other couples?
Well, I met my husband the first week of medical school, and then we got together, we got engaged, and I had my first child just before 3rd year of just after 3rd year of medical school, second child just before my internship. And the point that I want to make is that basically for the first 10 years of our life together, we either had babies, well, we both had babies in diapers and were working 70 to 100 hours a week. So we
Yes.
never had time for leisurely weekends in bed or romantic getaways or whatever it is that figure prominently in romantic comedies. That just was not part of our life.
Uh-huh.
And so we had sex that was good, but it
Uh-huh.
wasn't the main thing that intrigued me was I wanted to have the kind of sex where afterwards we felt closer to one another. I wanted to experience spiritual expansion and ecstasy. And we had pleasure, but it wasn't the kind of sex that the poets write about. That is for
Gotcha. It
sure.
was functional sex, but nothing
Functional sex.
transcendent. Uh-huh.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
functional sex, not transcendent, definitely stress relieving sex.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't further apart after sex, which could have happened but didn't, but we weren't particularly closer either. And I always thought, okay, once we have time,
Uh-huh.
then then it's going to be delicious.
Uh-huh.
But as I say, 10 years in, I had all of my weekends off. He had most weekends off. We didn't have any children in diapers. We had evenings together. But our sex life didn't get worse, but it didn't get better in terms of the amount of passion, and I love that you use the word transcendent. It just wasn't that way, and, we have a good life otherwise, like I was talking about before, and however many decades together, hopefully, it still took me a long time to actually name the situation as I experienced it. And that has to do with the things I've already spoken about. And it also has to do with the fact that both my husband and I are children of divorce. And
Uh-huh.
I was 9 years old when my parents got divorced. He was 6. And there was a part of me that felt like if I say intimacy isn't really working for me, that there was this very imagined, but it felt real risk that we would end up going down the path of divorce. And I would look back and think it all started when I said I wasn't happy with my sex life. But
Gotcha.
it was terrifying. But to my surprise, when I very gently said something, my husband said, "Yeah, me too. Let's work on it."
Wow, that's good. I want to back up a little bit. I think a lot of couples, if they're in, like what you say, 10 years in with children and life has just been really busy and you've developed these patterns of functional sex, they don't think that things can get any better because they don't like even think or can fathom an, an alternate reality. What is it for you that you realized this sex that we're having is okay, but it can be so much better? Was it books or movies or like what influenced you to realize what we're having? We're living beneath our privileges, so to speak, knowing it can be so much more.
Yeah, what an intricate, valuable question. So, I need to step back a little bit and talk about my professional journey because I was in my mid-30s. I had my own small holistic medical practice north of Boston. I'd paid, I think I said this already, but anyway, I'd paid my medical school loans, and um, I was married. We have 4 children. We had 3 at the time, and I just thought I should feel satisfied. I've worked
Hmm.
really hard for about 15 years,
I
and
paid off
now
my debt.
yes,
Uh-huh.
I just should feel satisfied, gratified, and ready to keep living this way for another 4 decades or so. But that's not actually how I felt, and it was hard to put my finger on it. I wasn't burnt out. Now there's a widespread phenomenon of doctors being burnt out and other concerns, and a lot of doctors leave clinical practice now, but at the time, I knew no doctors who had left clinical practice other than due to addiction or injury, and
Hmm.
so I was mostly confused, and it was at the level of a whisper, but I knew if I didn't do anything, it would get to be a roar. So, I took a sabbatical.
Uh-huh.
And during that sabbatical, I did some things that for me were completely radical.
Okay.
If you're like me in this regard, you'll get it. If you're not, it's going to sound so simple and
Uh-huh.
basic. But basically, what I did is I gave myself permission to do things for no reason other than that I wanted to.
Okay. That is radical.
It was really radical because the
Uh-huh.
first thing I had to discover is that I didn't know what I wanted to do. When I
You
put
stop
aside
shoulding on yourself, first of all, saying should or
yes,
should not. Uh-huh. Okay. All right.
exactly, and I still had a household to run and my husband and 3 children, so I didn't have a lot. It's not like I suddenly had hours and hours, but in the hours that I had that were now free,
Uh-huh.
I felt the emptiness, but it really took some time for some authentic desire to bubble up. And I still initially kept thinking of my to-do lists and my responsibilities and, "Oh, well, maybe I can get ahead with this or that." And I had to really learn. I just went and sat by the river. I took a dance class. I gave myself permission to let how I felt about something be enough reason to do it. So it really was disrupting doing things as a means to an end. Even going on vacation for me back in those days was a means to an end. It was because it would be
Uh-huh.
good for everybody.
Right. Uh-huh.
So, with this openness, I also began to experience myself as a woman in a way that I hadn't before. I took
Uh-huh.
classes that cultivated feminine qualities that I just was curious and a little intimidated. I didn't own any lip gloss at the time, and so I bought my first lip gloss. I
Uh-huh.
bought some heels, things that are not that special except if you've been wearing scrubs and sneakers in the hospital and taking care of kids. It was a big deal for me. And my mother was more of a hippie. So I really just was exploring parts of myself that had been dormant since I was a little girl. And
Hmm.
in the course of doing that, first with a little bit spiffing up my appearance and dancing and having more fun and kind of emphasizing friendships with women in a way that I hadn't during my medical training and beyond, I found myself eventually at the point where my life had really gone into technicolor in terms of gratification and depth of meaning and experiencing my life in a rich way. And the one area that lagged is the one we're talking about today, where I thought, well, if I've been able to feel differently about cooking dinner for my family, about how I'm going to spend an afternoon, what if I can feel differently in the bedroom too?
That's wonderful because with the men I work with and the couples I work with, I often hear the complaint that she just doesn't know what she wants in bed. And I ask her, and it's blank. And I believe there's some truth to that. Some women just really don't know what they want in bed because they haven't thought about it. But do you think there's a correlation there? Sometimes they're not living their life, they're living someone else's life. And like what you did, you took a radical step forward and started living your own life and deciding what mattered to you. That kind of opened up more possibility and color and depth to who you were.
Yes, this is a I'm going to give a multifactorial answer. Um, let's see. First of all, you said that women don't think about what they want in bed. And I just want to emphasize that this question of what do you want, it's really not an intellectual inquiry. It happens much more in embodiment and sensation and imagination. And so analysis and logic is not going to help a woman answer this question. So I just
Right.
want to
And I
emphasize
should
that.
and I should also clarify this isn't just for women also. A lot of men struggle too with knowing what they really want. So it's not
For
just women.
sure. For
Uh-huh.
sure. Although I'm going to answer for the women.
Yes.
So I actually have a very simple program on this. It's called Desires Awaken the Woman Within. And I'm thinking of the structure of that program as I give my answer. So the first thing is to just discover what it is that you want. And you can do that by just making a list each day. And actually, when I first started making a desire list, this is not about in bed yet. When
Mhm.
I started making a desire list, it looked a lot like a to-do list. And I really had to like separate what I wanted to get done and what I wanted to happen from what I desire. And I want to emphasize that we don't choose our desires. We
Uh-huh.
choose how we respond to them, but we don't choose our desires. We really just have to listen to it. And for some women, it's easy to identify material things they want. What kind of fancy car, what kind of shoes, what kind of jewelry. And for some women, that is so confronting.
Uh-huh.
Similarly, for some women, you might know how you want to be caressed, how you like to be kissed. And for another woman, they have no idea. Or how do you like your tea or coffee? That is actually a great way to start because there's what you desire in bed, but before that, there's what your relationship to desire is. And so
Uh-huh.
I emphasize cultivating that more generally, just anything that you enjoy, if it's a certain kind of music or how you like your coffee or tea, let yourself feel that desire.
What you're saying reminds me of the movie Runaway Bride, with Julia Roberts, I think is the actress in there. Like she can't what she wants is what her boyfriend at the time wants. Like the way she likes her coffee is the way her boyfriend likes coffee, or eggs, or music, or whatever it is. And it wasn't until later in the film she really decided what she wants, is when she's able to really choose, because she's
Yes.
always living in someone else's shadow.
And there's a way in which men are conditioned around this. And there is certainly a way in which women are conditioned to, be rewarded for service and helpfulness and nurturing, none of which really directly correlate with connecting with what we want. So, yes, I'm glad you brought up the runaway bride, because that's the phenomenon. So, that's really the first step. And then the second step is it's risky to welcome in your desires, because inevitably there's some desires that come that you don't approve of, that are actually taboos. And that can be because something is too expensive or too exotic, or you don't deserve it, or in the bedroom it just makes you blush to think of communicating it to your spouse. Like,
Hmm.
there are many, many impediments even once you do know what you want. And
Right.
so in my program, which, as I say, it's uh, $50. It's not a complex thing, but there's a lesson on identifying what you want, a lesson on navigating the sense of taboo, and then my very favorite is the lesson on how to ask for what you want so it
Uh-huh.
feels really good to give it to you. Because the trap that so many women fall into when they do know what they want is they blame their husbands for not already giving it to them, or point out critically how their husbands are failing them. And neither of those make it really lovely to give you what you want.
Yeah, I can see that. So, any stories from those that you work with, maybe people that you've coached, where you saw how these principles of learning to desire really help them open up and blossom to reach more?
Absolutely. So, the place that, if someone is having difficulty knowing what they want, and specifically knowing what they want in bed, I usually start by encouraging them to pay attention to something they desire that is sensual but not sexual in nature.
Such
So,
as,
well, this one client that I coached, whose husband really loved sex, and she just was awkward and didn't know what she wanted and didn't know how to make it wonderful, although she wanted to give him that experience. She worked a lot of hours and had 3 children and no time to herself. And so it took a while to find something, but it turns out she loves coffee.
uh-huh,
So I encouraged her not just to have coffee, but to be very deliberate in choosing her favorite mug, in when she pours it, taking a moment to enjoy the aroma of that coffee, being deliberate as she stirs the sugar, and really let everything else in life fall away and enjoy drinking that coffee. And this was challenging. But once she could do that, she could similarly in bed relax enough, slow down enough to experience those sensations.
mm-hmm,
Another client that I coached who really had no idea what she wanted in bed, I asked her how she washes her face in the morning.
mm-hmm,
And she showed me. And I know for those listening, you can't see my visual,
uh-huh,
but basically, it was just extremely practical, the way she might have wiped down a kitchen sink with a sponge, just like get it washed. And
uh-huh,
that is something that takes no more time, to just slow down and wash your face with a caress and notice the pace, the pressure, the temperature of the water. These
mm-hmm,
are places to identify desire. And with practice, you can trust your relationship to your desire trust it to speak to you and trust yourself to hear it. And then it's about hacking that and bringing that same skill set into the bedroom. But I don't recommend starting to discover your desires in the bedroom. I'd rather have it be a little simpler and less confronting, because honoring your own desires is its own skill set before you even apply it to the bedroom.
Got it. Love that. Love that. Which
Does
might
that
lead into my
speak to
next
your
question.
yeah, does that speak to your experience? I'm talking
Yes.
about this so
Yes.
much as a woman.
As for me as a man, in the previous podcast, I talked about a time I had saved up all this money to buy my dream car. And I had the money for it just sitting in the bank for a year before I could buy it. And I was
Brilliant.
going to pay cash for it and everything. The problem for me was, can I really allow myself to desire something that I really want? And that
We
was
have
a
so
big
many
internal struggle.
taboos.
Mhm.
Yes.
But for me, it was making the connection that learning to desire is connected with growth. Like, you can't grow as a person spiritually, physically, intellectually without having a healthy relationship with your desires. And I like what you're pointing out and teaching today, because as you allow yourself to like really slow down and pay attention to what is it that I like about this, or what do I like your face washing example, like, can you savor this? Can you enjoy this? Can you desire this? Then that leads you to opening up your heart to more growth, to desire things. It's fundamental for humans. Yet some of us are raised or socialized or whatever you want to call it to be wantless, needless. I always in the position to help other people, but not accept help from other people, for example. And, and if you live that way too long, you're going to have trouble in the bedroom, because you can't desire your spouse. You can't want that. You can't pursue pleasure.
I completely agree with you. And having someone desire you is one of the sexiest things. So, this is, when it goes well, synergistic compounding gratification. And when it doesn't go well, it is kind of a domino effect that makes it hard to enjoy pleasure together.
Yeah. Yep. So your book is titled Uncompromising Intimacy. How'd you come up with that title?
Well, throughout, really, for sure, the Western world and maybe the whole world, the most common relationship advice that's given is that you need to learn to compromise. If you want a great
Yes, that's
relationship,
true.
you have to be good at compromise.
But compromise sounds like, okay, I don't want the red shoes, I don't want the blue shoes, so I'm going to wear one red shoe and one blue shoe, which is even worse. Going with
Yes, well, at
uh-huh.
least you're wearing shoes, because
Right.
some compromise
But
means no shoes at all.
right, which is even worse.
Yes.
Fashion wise, it's worse to go with different colored shoes. Uh-huh.
So the way that I think about it is that when we compromise, we are holding back our desires, sometimes our challenges, our our internal experience, the truth of who we are. We're holding that back so that our partner is more comfortable, so that our partner doesn't have to deal with how much emotion or how much desire we have. We want to protect our partner. So compromise is a nice thing to do. However, what compromise will deliver is a bland companionship. It does not contribute to passion. What
Mhm.
contributes to sizzle and spark and expressed and gratified desire is what I describe as uncompromising intimacy. And by uncompromising, I do not mean that you always get your own way. That's not
Okay.
how I mean it. By
Mhm.
uncompromising, I mean, in contrast to compromise being a context for holding back who you are, being uncompromising means knowing yourself well enough, knowing your desires, and learning how to share them with your spouse so that they can hear it and receive it. So I don't know about the white shoes and the red shoes, but this comes up more where, let's say, your spouse loves Italian food and you love Thai food, and you don't say so. You just always go for Italian food because then your spouse will be happy and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if you share, I love you. I'm glad to go to the Italian restaurant because I know it means so much to you. But I really love Thai food and have been wanting some for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's so many creative things that can happen. Maybe you both get takeout and eat in a park. Maybe your husband eats at home and just goes and has some broth at the Thai restaurant and loves seeing you eat the dishes you enjoy. Like, when you don't protect your partner through compromise and instead count on the marriage as one that is resilient enough to allow creativity and growth and invite both people to be fully expressed, that
Mm-hmm.
paves the way for extraordinary expansion in all areas of the relationship.
That's really good. Any specific examples from your own experience of where you may have used to compromise in one area, but now you realize you went uncompromising and things went better?
Yeah, I'm going to use a very recent example, which um, might not be what you would expect, but I've been in a lot of different trainings and delivered a lot of trainings where the question is, what do you desire? And
Mm-hmm.
because I think this is so important. So, one of my answers is that I have desired to go horseback riding. I hadn't ridden since I was 13, but just the thought of it lit me up. And so, for a good 10 years, one of my answers is that I want to go horseback riding, but I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And something relaxed or opened, I'm not quite sure, but we're having this conversation at the end of September, and in July I finally really accepted this. And so, even though it's extremely inconvenient because I have to drive about an hour one way to get to the barn because of where I live and the kind of riding I want to do. So it's 4 hours, and I'm in my 15th year of homeschooling. I have a full business doing relationship and intimacy coaching. My husband is a physician. The point is, I didn't think I had 4 hours every week.
Mm-hmm.
But I told my husband, this has become really important to me. And it's a funny example because now that I go riding every week, I love my life more. There's a part of me that is fully expressed. I don't know why I didn't have the time, why I didn't start it 10 years ago. And my being able to pursue something so meaningful for me makes it hotter between us. And he actually was never the impediment. That's why I emphasize with compromise, we don't share things thinking it will be a problem for our partner. And many times it actually isn't. We just think it would be. And so we just don't speak up because it's not worth the trouble. So
I see.
that might not be evidently a sexy example, but it actually is because I feel more alive. I feel gratified. I feel more integrated. I am filled with these memories from my childhood that really are gratifying to me. And I feel like I am more present and more available for every kind of intimacy with my husband because I finally prioritize myself enough to go ride.
That's so good. This is great. All right, Alexandra, as we close up today, let's say you're a couple who's applying all the things that you've learning. They are more in touch with their desires. They're not compromising. Now, let's take things to the bedroom. What are your black belt sex tips? What are
Okay.
2 or 3 ideas to take things really to the next level in the bedroom?
Yeah, I love that you call it a black belt sex tip. But okay, so honestly, my best black belt sex tip happens before you get to the bedroom. And I have two of
Great.
them.
Uh huh.
One of them is that the best positive predictor for a happy sex life and a long-lasting happy marriage is actually talking about sex. Of couples who don't
Mm.
ever discuss sex with one another, only 9% describe being satisfied in the bedroom. So
Ah, great.
just getting that conversation going is transformational. Maybe not the first time, but you get used to having those conversations and your sex life will explode in the best way. My
Great.
second black belt tip is that in the context of long-term marriage, emotional intimacy is essential for and paves the way for sexual intimacy. So if you're not having the sex that you want to be having,
Hmm.
the very first place to put attention is on deepening and cultivating emotional intimacy. And that brings you closer together and also makes it so that you can be on the same team navigating how to improve your sex life.
That's great. Those are two great tips. That's great.
Thank
Talk
you.
about it and have good emotional intimacy too. Fantastic. Where can people find you and your work online?
AlexandraStockwell.com, and you'll find a link to my book, my podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast. If your attention was caught on my Desires program, you'll find that on the Work With Me page. And you can also just reach out to me directly. It's all at alexandrastockwell.com.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful conversation.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.